a little bit around me and where I kind of come to this. So I've always, for some reason, been interested in work. And apologies if I talk about occupational science and OT in a not as informed way as I can. It's something that I've naturally kind of progressed into from my work in design and my studies at Aalto University. But as I say, going right back from, when I made a terrible mistake, went to art school, I've always been really interested in work and productivity and people's experience of work. I'm not really sure why. And I've always been interested in creativity as well. Again, going right back to kind of art school, but not creativity just in terms of the kind of arts and the way that people use creativity in the arts, but really creativity embedded into occupation, really, and experience. So work, creativity, and then also just always been into kind of subcultures for some reason as well. So a bit of an odd mixture. But just to start on my journey into occupation, as I mentioned, went to art school. I worked in industry for 14 years, and I worked in all different kind of aspects of the creative industries, and ended up working in a small company. And again, just by chance, I kind of ended up being the kind of IT person in this company, even though I'm really not technically knowledgeable at all. And the interesting thing is that in this company, although it was very advanced in the production process and the tools and technology, all of the people working in the place were very skeptical of using technology to help them with their jobs. And despite having all of these really advanced systems that could help them, they kind of refused and just used bits of paper and notebooks and all of this kind of thing. And it kind of got me again, always been interested in work, but it kind of then became a question of, well, how is it that technology and work kind of go together? What are the difficulties? And that led to me studying human computer interaction, which is really the psychology of technology and people, not just in the work context, but a lot of HCI, and I'm sure you'll know this and know the topic, is really about understanding human activity in a work context. What are the tools that people use? What are the tasks that they need to carry out? What are their goals? And although that's HCI is mainly a kind of psychology based discipline, it also has this really neat tradition of participatory design, which really comes from Scandinavia, and that's one of the reasons that I ended up at Aalto, is because I believed at the time that democratizing workplace technology was something that the Nordics and Scandinavia were particularly there's a tradition there. And then as I say, I kind of slightly maybe made a mistake in thinking that, because actually when I went to Aalto, they were saying, right, all these people in the UK understand the psychology of work much better than we do. And there's also this tradition that I discovered for myself. I mean, all of it's been a discovery from this through to occupation, of the Tavistock Institute, and particularly, well known. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. The work of Eric Triss, and after the Second World War, he went in started the Tavistock Institute and looked at ordinary people's experience of work. And this was really quite a departure from the kind of time and motion Fordist ways of optimizing work and the kind of atomization of work. And what Trist found is that in his studies of coal miners, that actually the work that people did was highly improvised and highly collaborative, and people had to some level were empowered to define the way that they worked. So anyway, it's just a little bit of background of where I again went from kind of design and HCI through to work studies. So then when I started my PhD, I obviously in a school of design kind of took in and soaked up all of the design research literature, and I found that there was a gap. The design research literature is very theoretical, and as a practitioner, I found that there wasn't really much research studies into the work of designers. Now, I appreciate that designers are not the most exploited and hard off sector of a workforce or people, but that's kind of where I am. So for good or bad, I kind of decided that I would address this gap, and so this is where I started to look at how you study digital designers. And the digital bit is important because unlike Trist, who could go into a coal mine and observe people and talk to them, we're all working remotely, so the atomization of kind of workforces makes the research more difficult in some ways, but also the work is not physical labor, it's informational creative labor. So anyway, just a bit of background on that. So as I started in lockdown, I kind of got up to this point where I was thinking, there's this gap. No one's really looking at the experience of doing design as a job, and I'd looked at all of these different theories. Social practice theory was the kind of nearest that I could get to it, but I didn't really have like a framework for understanding and doing research around creative work, let's call it. So I went through a series of kind of steps really to do that, and I did these spotlight studies, tended to be like interviews and questionnaires. I'll go into that into a bit more detail, and they helped me. Well, they didn't help me. They told me that actually the kind of work that digital designers, developers do is quite stressful because of Agile. So I looked into Agile as a way of producing stuff, and some of the kind of structural elements of work. So although I kind of discarded social practice theory, some of the kind of concepts, I guess, around structure and agency have kind of come through. So I guess now I kind of look at occupation as built on those two things. There's the structure, there's the kind of rules and norms around how work is done, but then there's the agency, not just of the humans involved in the work, but also the technology. But anyway, in the top of that slide there, that's kind of preparation. And then as I came into lockdown, I decided that I would go into a different level of research, maybe just different kind. I'd do some diary study research. So I ran a 4-week diary study, and I've done some, and this is where I go back to the kind of human computer interaction side of things, using the kind of research methods and tools that I would do if I, as a practitioner. So done experience sampling. So that's where you would sample, you know, group of participants, either time-based at a particular time of the day, or some other kind of structure to mapping their experience. Then I use that data to create some dimensions around the occupational work experience, which I'll show you. And another thing that I've done a few times in my career, which is collaborative writing. And weirdly enough, when I was at art school, one of the people there was Roy Ascott, who allegedly helped create the first ever, I'm not even sure what you call it, multiple authored narrative. So he had a network of computers globally, 6 different authors, and they wrote this probably awful story, but it was quite it was pre internet, you know, so it's quite a innovative thing. And this idea of collaborative writing is something that I've kind of dipped into again as a practitioner, as a way of doing research. But I found I used this method, so I'll show you some of the ways that I did this, to get participants to write a narrative of their work experience. And I found it a really good way of basically collecting data quite quickly and getting different perspectives from a practitioner, but also as a from a work perspective. And then a bit of reflective diary keeping, and I'll show you some of these. I involved the participants in some of the analysis as well. Gosh, I'm only on slide 2, aren't I? I'm going to have to hurry up. Anyway, so that's the methodology. Kind of done some studies to kind of set the context a little bit, and they were again mainly surveys, some workshops, mostly online, and that helped me to answer these kind of high level research questions about what is design work, how does that impact people, and how does design fit into the broader context, and that was quite a difficult thing to put a boundary around, because when you get to study work, there's a tendency or a line of direction that goes into economics and the exploitation of workers and work studies, and this is really where occupation came in to my thinking, and it helped me avoid falling into that kind of rabbit hole of becoming too broad, because again, my interest in work is really at the level of the person doing the work, their experience, the way that they do that, and the kind of conflicts they have. So occupation seemed like a more viable framework to study the more granular aspects of doing work than other ones. And I'm really grateful for Bex helping me, you know, kind of go in that direction. And you know, as I said at the beginning, or Bex said, you know, I'm not I'm a designer and practitioner. I'm not an occupational person. So again, I'm sorry if I'm used the wrong terms, or you know, take things in a slightly different direction, but for me it's just a really useful framework to study and understand work. So yeah, so I went through this kind of funnel really of kind of quite broad studies down to this diary study, and I mentioned the collaborative writing. So what I did, and as I mentioned, I've done this a few times, was set up the diaries in Google, and I put a structure in, which was basically the kind of classic 5-act narrative, and I did that just because as a practitioner researcher, I find it's quite difficult if you just, it's like a blank page. I think it's quite difficult. So for participants to give their kind of content and ideas. On the other hand, maybe that 5 acts structure, you know, is quite determined in the kind of data you get out. So 5 days, everyone just worked around this structure and added their content. I'll just show you now a little bit of how that works. So it was really effective using Google as a way of doing digital diary keeping. I won't show you any of the kind of individual entries, but they were all anonymous. I just kept folders of each week. It meant that I could do the analysis within the environment, let's call it. And it was a really good way of working. Now, I think I've also got some examples. So with the narrative, what it meant is that I basically collected a whole corpus of data, words, phrases that people used in the narrative, and I think there's like nearly 1,200 individual utterances, and that meant that I could then do some, what I, again, as a practitioner, qualitative thematic coding of the corpus, and could start to build some kind of insight into that. So I covered all different kind of areas because the data itself was so rich. Oh, here we are. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing. So and it was a inductive analysis. So I was collecting data, but also doing some facets, theming, and identifying nodes within the data. And this is where I started to see how the data had a really good fit. Well, not really good, had a good fit, let's say, with Wilcock's framework of doing becoming and belonging, because what was in the data, some of it was clearly around tasks, the things that people were doing. Some of it was about the balance between work and themselves and how they felt, and some of it was around their belonging to a team. So I started to get into building out the analysis around that kind of overall framework. I'll just go back to the slides. Sorry, there's so much to talk about, but anyway, so collaborative writing created a corpus that allowed me to then analyze what people had written, and kind of moving forward a bit. I've recently kind of documented this in terms of how, at least in design, what's the kind of methodology that you would use to do research in this area. And that's also as a practitioner. So diary studies were really good in getting this kind of insider view, but also being a practitioner, having an outsider view was useful as well. So occupational inquiry is just a label I've really given to doing the work, doing the same work as the participants, but having that kind of view from both sides I've found to be really useful. And it's been a bit of a challenge because people talk about autoethnography and ways of doing, there's I can't remember the term, but ways of doing research where you are the researcher and participant, and I've always found it a bit not very convincing. But I think having a combination of studies with the participants and yourself it works well, but it's not only doing surveying. I think the storytelling, co-creation of the stories, and the accounts. So I talk about like accounts of practice. How would you describe practice in a kind of narrative? Is a good way of capturing that. So anyway, so just to summarize, early kind of wide studies, went into a diary study, didn't really know too much what I would find. I used this story building to develop a corpus that I then have used, and I'll talk about the analysis and the results of that. But it also helped me kind of think, well, if someone says, what's the methodology, or how would you go about understanding work, then, you know, going back to kind of Trist, that's more the kind of occupational inquiry, where you are the person who's doing the work, and you kind of understand it from that point of view. But then also understanding work over time through diary studies, and doing these different activities, I think, work together. So I've kind of got a bit of a funny structure with this presentation, because I'm now going to just tell you about what I think I found from going through this process of funneling down to this more collaborative way of doing research. And I've not shown this to anyone in your field, so you might cry heresy and throw me out, but the data, so there was as I said, not a really good fit. There was a good fit with the data that I collected in the diary study for the Wilcock's framework, but there was other stuff that I found, or that was in the data, that didn't quite fit. And the most strongest one was around knowing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, the data, you know, you could map it to things that were about what people were doing and how they felt, and them having some concept of them in the future and where they're going, and being related within a group of other workers. But other things that were in the data that didn't fit was that actually the doing, there was good and bad. So the bad kind of side of doing was where there was a lot of stress and conflict in some situations, and lack of structure and ambiguity. And when it's good, it's this kind of flow experience where, you know, people are just really engrossed in what they're doing, and, you know, it's time disappears, that kind of experience. And similarly with becoming and belonging, at least in the studies that I've done and the participants that I had, it was more specific. So becoming was quite strongly correlated with a sense of meaningfulness. So doing work that didn't really seem to contribute or to add meaning to people's individual lives, but also to where they see themselves going, was seen to be negative. Similarly, work that was really meaningful and aligned with people's beliefs and goals, you know, was good. So I'll go a bit more into this now. I think I'm okay on time. So basically, doing this stuff, I think I have some insights into the structure of creative work, really, or digital designers' work. I'm not sure whether it's the same, similar, or completely unique from other areas of information workers' experience. But just to go through that kind of funnel, the early studies that I did were mainly quite concrete. It's like, what kind of things do you do? You know, are you doing managing, or are you doing selling, or are you doing making prototypes or development? You know, so I was just trying to understand what people did, and unsurprisingly, you know, a lot of especially with seniority, a lot of the doing actually becomes more managing than practice. Or that's probably the wrong way of saying it. more of the work becomes managing than the more kind of hands-on, let's say, activities. And as we get into the diary study data, what came out was these facets that were about the kind of the different types of projects. Essentially, I call them missions, but work isn't just one, kind of a homogenous thing. It's actually, like all different kinds of work, and this kind of idea of middling, tweak, and strategic, as I ended up calling it, missions. I'll talk about that in a second. Similarly, with the roles that people have, people's roles, both in terms of their ability to be autonomous and to be resilient, and their connection is completely varied, and it depends on many different factors, many of which are outside of the control of the individual. And I think I've kind of got a bit of granularity of where those kind of pressure points are, and then some on the kind of balance between those things. So I mentioned mission, and the reason that I talk about this is because one of the big things that I found, one of the things I found was that different kinds of work are more or less prone to imbalance, and strategic missions, so like really big pieces of work, tend to be well resourced and managed and planned and not ambiguous, and they tend to be more good for people. And similarly, what I call tweaks, which is, very small pieces of work. It might be just changing a line of code or making some content changes to something, is so small it's easy and satisfying. So the big and the small are good kind of sized pieces of work activity. The bad ones are what I call middling missions, and that's where there's all these assumptions and lack of alignment and politics and conflicting priorities between different teams, and these are the ones that really bring people down. So I've focused on, in the later bit of this research, on how to help practitioners manage working in these middling missions better. And I use Dad's Army because it's that kind of it's that kind of demographic where these projects are really chaotic, and it's the same kind of thing. It's just being pulled in different directions. So that is really a layer in how I communicate the more complex things, which are what's the occupation, what are the kind of levers within the occupational experience. And as I mentioned, probably too quickly, all of this is, especially these middling missions, built on Agile development. And some of my early research was all about Agile, and agility is almost, 99.99% in the research proposed as a positive, progressive way of working. And that's partly because 99.9% of the people doing research on Agile are engineers and scientists and computer scientists. And from that standpoint, Agile is brilliant. But from those early studies and through to the diary study, I found that Agile actually creates a lot of conflict. And the reasons for that, and I mentioned, the different kinds of missions, and the ones in the middle being the more difficult ones, is pace. So Agile is like all about working as fast as you can, and that produces imbalance. Similarly, misunderstanding about people's roles, both externally to the individual and within themselves is a source of imbalance. And this is where the kind of autonomy issue comes up, because in the kind of hierarchy, let's call it, of agile work, designers, and I haven't really quite worked this out, agile designers tend to be the least empowered and the least in control of the kind of direction of missions, compared to, say, developers and other roles. And then the relatedness is kind of like a balancing factor, because within agile pods, people get a lot of agency and you know, good feelings from working with people, but you know, it can also go the other way. And then on the mission side, so you know, having challenge is again a double-edged sword. If it's too unstructured and ambiguous and too big a challenge, it starts to become difficult. So all of these factors, missions, what people do, the roles that people have within the missions, who they're working with, and the velocity of the work, all has potentially good and bad impacts on what people do and how they feel about it. So in the diary study, I, using the experience sampling method, ESM, which is used in HCI, I elicited self-reports on how people were feeling in different, you know, it's kind of a random sample because it's over 1 week, and people working in all different, you know, big, medium-sized and small missions. And these nodes were something that I'd iterated through from the early studies. I knew that there was, well, I knew, I believe there was something around control and empowerment and disempowerment that that kind of affected people's sense of balance. So I iterated it, and in the first week of the diary study, I gave the participants a fixed list, and with one option to add a descriptor, so something that that described how they felt in work, that wasn't in the list, and the list was pretty stable. There's only a couple of the descriptors changed, and I haven't really done very much with this since, but basically it's a framework for saying, okay, well, you know, how you feel at the moment in your work, you know, are you feeling more alienated or more aligned? Is it boring or exciting? So, you know, there's potential to use this, and I don't know how generalizable the descriptors are, probably not very much, to map where people are in that spectrum of low to high. And obviously, you know, it's complicated because for different individuals and different times, you know, those what might be positive may in different contexts not be so good, but at least it gives hopefully a framework for kind of understanding that. So then on to knowledge. So when I did the sorry, skip back, when I did the collaborative writing, and I mentioned that there was a reasonable fit to Wilcock's. The thing that came out quite strongly, other than the more structural stuff, was on the agency of individuals in work. And the thing that came out very strongly, and I don't know whether this is just because of the cohort that I was doing the research with, or whether it's a kind of information worker thing, but were these the resources that people used to do the work based on knowledge. And again, this was a bit of a difficult one, because I know that, you know, I can't claim to identify types of knowledge, so I'm not really sure where that is. But at the same time, the data was so strongly aligned to these 4 different areas of knowledge. And I could subsequently go back to my previous studies. I've done a study on senior practitioners, so people who've been doing design for 10, 20 years, and interestingly these facets of knowing mapped to levels of seniority. And if I'll just try and explain that a bit more. They've got these weird names because when I was doing thematic coding, and these groups appeared and facets within them, but they didn't have, I couldn't label them in English language. There was no kind of clear words to describe this group of themes. The only thing that I found similar, actually, weirdly enough, goes back to ancient Greeks, and I can't remember his name, but or someone mapped out different kinds of knowledge, and it was phronesis and different, there's a kind of ancient Greek thing on this, but that doesn't really help, either in terms of validating it or naming it. So I just kind of made these names up, really. So the 4 different kinds of knowledge that I found in the data, the first one was what I call Ken, which is, it's about theory. And again, I don't know how generalizable this is, but for designers, having some knowledge about the theories of design, it's not a very important thing, but people do think like that. They think about the kind of tradition, heritage, the ideas, concepts that are in design in their work. And then the middle 2, which were the most frequently mentioned. The first one was Kai, which is contextual knowledge. So that's where people rely on knowledge that is contextual to them, usually. So that means like seeing how someone else has done something, or looking at case studies. And I don't mean case studies in like an academic way, but in what my professor calls airport literature, examples of how people have tackled a similar problem, and also looking at methods, and design now is very method driven. So these are all like looking at knowledge that's been kind of concretized in a method or a case, or documented, that people can then go, okay, well, I've not done that, but I will use this kind of knowledge to tackle the problem. And then the other one, which was actually the biggest one, was Nous, which is, from the data, the kind of knowledge that is situation, is improvisation. It's like a jazz band playing without music. It's just kind of working at that level of kind of being able to be in the experience of work and move around it without relying on theory or what other people have done, but improvising and coming up with your own way of turning things. And it's really interesting that ethics was strong in that theme, and really, unlike the other types of knowing that I found, this is really personal to the individual. So again, going back to the Wilcock's framework, this knowledge thing is not just about knowing how to do things. It's actually quite implicit to those other 4 factors of what it is people do. And then the last one was knack, which is basically, being able to use Teams or whatever it is, which is, quite low, because tools are much easier to use. So I went a bit more into that, and you can see some of the facets and nodes. So as I mentioned in Nous, it's empathy and listening, being able to juggle things, move around, rather than kind of following a structure to solve a problem. Right, I'll just quickly go through these last few slides, because I hopefully started by explaining badly how I got into occupation, which is basically a gap in the design research knowledge, and my research kind of accidentally moved towards occupation, and I used some of the methods, diary studies, and experience sampling that I would use as a practitioner within doing design rather than studying work. But having done that, I kind of came to this conclusion that to really do a decent job of understanding the structure of work from a human perspective, you need these kind of 4 different ways of doing things. You need the time based things around diary studies, you need experiments, which I haven't really talked about, where there's a specific topic, so those individual spotlight studies tackled specific things and did some experimentation there, and then getting this practitioner perspective doing the work, and then also an outside view of observing it. So all of that gave me some, I think, interesting insights into the knowledge that digital designers use, and it also gave me some insights into the structure of work. What I ended up moving into was how to kind of flip things around, so using some of the design thinking methods to help people achieve better resilience and balance. And these are, I'll show you how these work quickly, but basically these are all kind of using design thinking type methods to do that. So for example, this one, I'll just switch over to the mural board. So, you know, a lot of the work now, rather than it being kind of physical workshops and using sticky notes in, you know, in a room, it's now all digital. So one of the tools that we use, I'm sure you use it as well, is Mural. And so what I've done is to start to use design thinking methods. So pink, blue and green is a design thinking method called Rose, Thorn, Bud, and it's a way of getting a balanced set of feedback on something. So rose is something good, blue is something not so good, and green is a, you know, a build and add to that. So in a workshop situation, I've been getting people to anonymously, so they have their own board, so I can't see what they're doing, but using the 4D BD framework to find out, you know, what is it about they're doing at the moment that's good, not so good, or they can improve on, and using that framework and the design thinking method to help them elicit on their own where they are and where they want to be in the future. So, you know, I'm guessing you've seen this, but, you know, the way it works, everyone's got their own board, and, you know, you can type in and add whatever you want. And these, I think, 3 adapted design thinking methods are the ones that I've been using. There's other ones. Just let me zoom out. So I should have maybe started with this bullseye diagram. So this is also really good at capturing, eliciting from people, and I, as a researcher, I don't see what the content that they're creating, but it's a good way of finding out what's kind of in their life at the moment, and the center is the most important, and it moves out to less important. So that's another one. And then also using this kind of path building, so as a structure and sequence in using design thinking methods, starting off by just kind of eliciting where people are, and then using that as the basis to do some planning, path building, I've called it, of where they are at the moment and moving into the future. And then the last thing is using some level of visualization to, again, to help people to envision where they want to be. And all of this was done in the diary study time. So each week, this is where I was talking about collaborative analysis, was actually getting people to talk about the results as they came through and the methods, so that people could use them. And just in the last, I've badly kind of gone over time, well, not 5 minutes. So I've done this stuff around using design thinking methods to help with achieving occupational balance. Sorry, that was about using again visualization to map where people are and to find ways of using physical objects to help. And that's about how using those design thinking methods to help people visualize the becoming quadrant of the of Wilcock's framework. So people actually start to, because designers stereotypically, do visioning and envisioning. So using that to help people to practically plan out how they change and who they become in the future. The last bit, just really quickly. So what I found with going back to the stresses of working in Agile is that in some ways doing this kind of stuff is good, but it's only really dealing with the symptoms. It's dealing with people's negative experience of work and of Agile working, and it's kind of helping them to get out of it, but it's not really solving the situation. So the last thing I've been working on is what I call these flow frameworks, which it's a collection of things, frameworks, some of them just within design, some of them outside, but they're all meant to help practitioners become more empowered over the work that they're given, and this has turned into a bit of a mini kind of course really, and some of the stuff is frameworks that I've created, like this ethics wheel. One of the things that in the research was that designers, for some reason in teams, are the people that end up having kind of moral dilemmas about the direction of work. People talk about kind of dark patterns and doing things that are not good for the user or the customer, and so some of these things have come through from the research and have been specific around the issues that I've found. Talked about the kind of path building. Sorry, I also did I wanted to validate the knowing bit of this, so I did, but literally that was last week. Sorry. But this, just to finish up on, so this kind of more structure based set of frameworks, I've got to quite a good place now, and the idea is that within teams they can adapt these frameworks to help them be more in control of the work that they're given, and again, some of them I've made, some of them are kind of classic design thinking stuff, but they're all based on kind of tactics of how you survive and thrive in the context of Agile working. So like how where do you start with work? How do you make your case that the work that you're doing is the right thing to do, and how do you defend? It's all slightly not military, but slightly about defense and offense for some reason at the moment. But yeah, that's it. Sorry, that's such a whirlwind tour of my research, but there you go. Thanks for giving me the platform and